AM 740 KVR. Welcome to the Accelerated Wealth Show, where you get retirement confidence in an uncertain world. I'm Chris Abeyta, your host today, with my wonderful co-host, Doug Berkey. And today we are talking about energy here and how that affects us in the United States, how that's going to affect us going future. You know, oil production, it has surged to 25-year highs, making the United States the largest combined oil and gas producer in the world. And with help from the federal government, we could get back to $1 per gallon gas. Or, you know, can we do that? Or was President Obama right when he said there's nothing he can do to influence the prices at the pump? Well, today we're going to talk with Dan Kish. He is the Vice President of Policy at the Nonpartisan Institute for Energy Research in Washington, D.C. You won't want to miss this. You're going to discover truths about how America's energy policy and oil prices are affecting your life. And before we dive into this with Dan, just a quick story from, I'm the younger guy, and I've got my seasoned old veteran here, Doug. I remember I had a Subaru Justy. This is back, I think, in the mid-90s, early 90s. Real small car, 3 cylinders, and I remember I was living in Oklahoma, and I could fill up my gas tank for $5. Those were the days. What was the least, the lowest gas price you remember, Doug?
In high school, I remember paying 19.9 cents per gallon.
Wow!
And amazingly enough, they filled up your not only filled up your gas tank for you, but they washed your windshield, they checked your oil, and made sure your tires were properly inflated, and maybe got a glass as an incentive to come to their gas station.
A glass? What kind of glass? Like a take-home glass?
Like a drinking glass.
With their brand on it and everything? And you collected those probably?
Yeah.
I remember steak knives. They used to give out steak knives at the Conoco around the corner. And I worked for Rich Ford in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was a lot boy. And my job was when we sold a car, I'd go clean the car, get it ready, drive it around the corner, use the company card to fill it up. And they gave us free steak knives. And so my boss said I could keep the free steak knives. So I loved filling up the car because I got a lot of steak knives. I don't know what I did with all those steak knives, but that was it was cool. And I got to keep them. I didn't have to give them back to Rich Ford. But, I'm excited to talk with Dan Kish. He's a senior vice president for the policy at the Institute for Energy. He has more than 25 years of experience on congressional committees. He's focused principally upon natural resource and energy policies, including 6 years as chief of staff for the Republicans on the House Resources Committee. Okay, so we've got a really neat gentleman with us here today. 4 years on the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee staff. His primary focus has been access to resources on government lands and in the waters of the Outer Continental Shelf, and specifically upon the enormous energy resources that we have right here off the shelf here in the United States. He's a graduate of the Wabash College in how do you say that, Dan? Crawfordsville, Indiana?
Crawfordsville.
Okay.
Yes.
So, Dan, thank you for joining us today. So glad that you could be here.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
You bet. Now, the Obama administration had goals of reaching 10 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2020 and 54 gigawatts by 2030. So 2 questions on that. One, can you put those numbers into context for us so we can understand them? I mean, what does 10 gigawatts look like?
10 gigawatt, a good-sized, very sizable nuclear power plant is about a
Really?
gigawatt.
Okay.
1,000 megawatts so it'd be the equivalent of 10 full-size nuclear plants with a caveat.
Okay.
The nuclear power plant runs at about 92% capacity all the in other words, it's pretty much running all the time. Wind runs on average in the range of 30 to 40%. It's not even considered a dispatchable power source. And
wow.
Sorry to throw terms at you like that,
yeah.
but it's so in other words, wind would require backup. The nuclear doesn't.
So the wind has kind of like trying to sail across the ocean. You really have to depend on the wind blowing to actually, if you don't have a motor.
Exactly. And with electricity, you need electric. We've always been used to it. When we flip the switch, the power goes to the whatever it is we're flipping the switch on, and that's the way our system's been built. And so we're beginning to experience some difficulties with the addition of all these things that sort of work when they want to. And that's not a pejorative. That's just the definition from an engineering perspective. One's dispatchable and one's not.
Dan, we see these huge wind farms around out on the prairies out here. Talk about the economics of offshore wind farms. What does that look like? Does it require great subsidization to make them efficient?
Yeah,
economically.
Both do. For example, the federal government actually pays the producers the wind that you see that's onshore under the existing something called the production tax credit in the U.S. code. Pays producers of wind 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour for production of that, and it's a direct credit. It's not a deduction, and you guys certainly know the difference. I think most of your listeners do as well. So it's a cash equivalent. They actually get paid to produce electricity, and the difference between onshore and offshore is offshore actually works more steadily. It pushes the 40% capacity threshold versus the onshore, which is lingering in the 30% range. Offshore is much more expensive, in the range of 2.5 times more expensive because of the structural and environmental considerations you have to deal with: salt water, obviously, and corrosives and anodes, and additionally, depending on where the wind is, the additional cost of moving it.
Okay, so it's it's more productive going offshore. Now, hey, if you've just joined us, we're talking to Dan Kish. He's the VP of Policy at the Institute for Energy Research in Washington, D.C. We're talking about wind power and green wind power. Dan, tell me, what's the position that you have from the Institute on this green energy and this wind power? What's your position, and what's your really bottom line? What's your thought on this?
Well, I mean, whether it's wind or solar or any of the other sort of alternatives that are currently being pushed in Washington, the simple fact of the matter is, and I know it annoys some people to hear this, but numbers don't lie. They cannot make it economically in the absence of subsidies, both at the federal level as well as the state level, and or mandates. And the mandates tend to come from the states. So they're not ready for prime time yet. We couldn't run the country on them. I think people would be afraid of the size of the deployment which would be necessary to run the country on them. And the good news, frankly, is that we don't have to run the country on them. We've got plenty of other sources, but they continue to get more efficient and better. But they are creatures of government policy, not mainstream economics.
There was recently some legislation that was brought up, and I don't know if it's been voted on yet or not, on offshore drilling and whether or not we were going to be able to do that. Do you have any update on that as far as where that stands? Has that been voted on yet?
No, and it has not. But a lot of people are very concerned about the current rate of development offshore, which has slowed considerably from historic trends, and actually the historic trend is not good with respect to offshore. To put it in perspective, less than 3% of the outer continental shelf of the United States has been leased for energy, and we keep going back to the same places, principally the Gulf of Mexico, 55% of the Gulf of Mexico, the other 45% off limits, and we haven't reached out. And so what we're dealing with are areas of the country, enormous areas offshore that could hold tremendous potential. I mean, game-changing potential, but they've not been looked at for 30 or 40 years because of Washington policies. And I think a lot of people would like to find out, well, gee, is there anything there? Not just to develop it necessarily, but also to just find out, to know what our prospects are in the future, and we might be looking a gift horse in the mouth if we in essence are not taking advantage of that.
So Dan, I hear you saying I hear this in your voice. Let's just kind of get it out. I hear you have. It sounds like you have challenges with the government policy. There's so much out there that we as Americans could extract, could lower the price of oil, could really make ourselves, I'm hearing, energy independent and secure. And it sounds like there's a lot of government policy that's holding us back from doing that. Am I correct?
Our government policies are abysmal on energy, and they, as a matter of fact, yeah, you're hearing me right.
Okay. Just say it. You can say it.
All right.
That's what's interesting. We want to hear hear the truth.
Our government policies on energy are frankly abysmal. I mean, we're pursuing at extreme cost to taxpayers certain forms of energy which are in favor in Washington, but don't necessarily make sense yet. And
meaning green, meaning solar, meaning wind. When these things are nice, I mean, we all like the idea of clean energy. Yep. But you're saying that the taxpayers are subsidizing all that, so our taxes are going up hugely. Hugely. To experiment with.
Yeah, I mean, we're experimenting with it at a huge cost to consumers, at a cost to consumers, at a cost we're watching electricity prices go up, even though electricity demand is basically flat.
Wow.
That's not supposed to happen. Everybody thinks that wind and solar are free. They're right. But the boxes that it takes to make those God-given resources into something, I mean, the fact of the matter is oil, coal, natural gas are also free. All you have to do is drill down and get them and dig down and get them. And so there's no real difference. They're all basically free. The question is, when you add up the costs and what their value is at the end of the day, it's still pretty clear that the reason we use the things that we use is not because of some, buddy's political thumb on the scale. It's because they were the ones that won out over a long period of time, and they have not been efficiently replaced yet.
Got it. When we come back, let's talk more about the impact of the taxpayer, what your thoughts are on where we should go as a country to really produce enough energy that is low-cost energy for the Americans and the generations to come. We'll be right back. You're listening to Accelerated Wealth on AM 740 KVOR.
Let's go back to Doug Berkey and Chris Abeyta for more about your financial future with Accelerated Wealth.
Welcome back to AM 740 KVOR at Accelerated Wealth, where you do get retirement confidence in an uncertain world. I'm Chris Abeyta, your host today with co-host Doug Berkey. We're talking with Dan Kish. He's the Vice President of Policy Institute for Energy Research in Washington, D.C. Now, Dan, something that's really important here for us in Colorado Springs is we have a coal plant, and that drives the majority, if not all, of our electricity. And I heard someone on the radio show, local, the other day, talking about how the administration's policies right now are wanting us to possibly shut down our coal plant and move more towards a natural gas plant to lower emissions and things like that. Tell me about what it means for us to have a coal plant, what's happening there. Is that a benefit to us? What happens if we make those changes?
Yeah, well, if you make those changes, electricity prices are going to go up considerably, and the people who worked at the coal plant are obviously not going to work there anymore. And any of the associated enterprise that goes along, whether that's railroad jobs or anything else, moving, all of those things go away. The person who was calling was right to worry about it, because Washington's policy right now to the Obama administration is global warming uber alles, carbon dioxide, the war on carbon dioxide, and the rest. And they truly, truly believe that somehow if the United States would just reduce its carbon dioxide emissions, the the weather will be perfect, I guess, for want of a better definition.
Okay.
And I like those days too when it's perfect. But the cost of that is significant and significant across the board. And so if you like low-priced electricity and frankly clean electricity, modern coal production is a good way to go. And for those people who have it, it's very good. I think you'd be surprised to see what some of the people in the Northeast who have gone to an all natural gas electrical system are now paying for electricity compared to you.
So you made a comment. You said that the government's energy policy right now is not pro-energy. It's basically, what did you say? It's anti-carbon dioxide.
Correct.
What are we seeing? Okay, so I drive by that plant, and I see lots of stuff coming out. What's coming out of those towers?
Steam, and some trace elements of other things, but well below the any kind of level that's been established with a health issue. And then carbon dioxide, you don't see carbon dioxide. But it's also coming out of there because whenever we exhale and whenever we combust any kind of carbon-based material, it produces carbon dioxide.
So is that dangerous? Are we polluting Colorado Springs because of that?
No. Carbon dioxide is not a traditional pollutant in terms of it takes extremely high levels for your health to be affected in any way. That's not the issue. The issue is its purported relationship to the warming of the Earth and climate change.
Okay, so that's the primary.
So apparently we have too many people breathing. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah. So if everybody could just take a deep breath and hold it, we'd be, well, it sort of becomes, and I don't mean to go on about it, but the fact of the matter is China consumes 4 times as much coal as we do, and we're not even a factor when it comes to that anymore in the world, increasingly less because as our economy becomes smaller as a proportion of the world's overall economy. Our carbon dioxide emissions, frankly, are, if we did away with all carbon dioxide emissions in the United States, according to the government's own models, the temperature would change less than 1/10 of a 100-degree over the next 50 years. So.
Wow. So we're seeing a lot of a big surge in oil production. Most of that gain seems to be happening on state or private lands. What's happening with the energy freeze on federal lands? Is that still in place, or where do you see that going?
Well, there's a distinct difference between the government's policies and the ones that take place because of state policies and those on private lands. And just to put that in perspective, over the last 5 years, there's been a 61% increase in oil production on non-government lands in the U.S. and a 6% reduction in oil production on government lands and waters. So we've got a tale of two cities, one of which has been really helpful to consumers and the economy and the rest because we've produced so much in historic proportions, increases in oil that the price worldwide has dropped, something that some of our politicians told us couldn't happen. And and we've got, so now we're enjoying the benefits of that at the pump. And our biggest problem right now is, can a lot of the production continue at today's prices? But that's a success story. We can work our way around that with technology. Whenever energy is cheaper, it's a better thing for American families and budgets and businesses.
I love it. You're listening to Accelerated Wealth. We have Dan Kish, VP of Policy for the Institute of Energy Research at Washington, D.C. We're just talking today about the difference between government policies towards green energy and what is actually happening with the energy revolution right here in America, right here in Colorado as well. And I love the fact that the pump is so much less expensive because it does put more money in our pockets. It does put more money in families' pockets. But what seems so challenging is that the government seems to be fighting that and making it more and more difficult for us to do what just seems like common sense, which is go get the cheapest energy we can find. It seems, Dan, like you had said over the break, that the way that we are burning our coal and the things that we're doing, that we produce so little pollution compared to China that even if we try to lower our emissions, it's going to make almost no effect on the climate. And yet the government seems to be pursuing things that are going to cost, almost like taxes, it's like a hidden tax, cost the taxpayer more and more and more when we could be making life better for Americans just by following common sense.
Yeah, I mean, we ought to be willing to occasionally pat ourselves on the back for the good work we've done. There was a time in the United States when our air looked like, in many of our major cities, looked like the air. And it really did. And we went through that phase, and we cleaned up our act, and we've done a wonderful job about it. And we see it in many of the metrics that we use to measure quality of life and length of life and everything. People are living longer. There's all of those.
We're doing a good job.
We're doing a good job, and we can always do better. But the question is, at what cost? And there are diminishing marginal returns when the government jumps on a regulatory bandwagon with respect to this stuff. And if the air is clean and good, and we can use money we'd otherwise spend to probably not in a good way to put it to other uses that might be more efficient, we ought to be thinking about doing that. And stop putting the burden on the consumers, and exactly, and the taxpayer.
I mean, it's like we're hitting it twice. We're hitting it twice. Once, we're subsidizing a lot of inefficient energy processes, so we as taxpayers are have to paying it once, and then we're paying again because we're having to pay for more expensive electricity.
Right.
Like a double hit.
Exactly.
So, Dan, there seems to be an organized effort on the left to crush the fracking industry, which has created so much of this growth in this industry. What's stunning to me is it's okay to send money to Middle Eastern countries who are dedicated to crushing us as a country and putting us, killing us. And yet it's okay to spend trillions of dollars there, but we don't want to have independent free energy here in the United States. Can you give me any insight into that?
Well, yeah. I mean, listen, remember, if the goal is carbon dioxide, people will use any excuse. If the goal is reductions in carbon dioxide, they don't want it. You'll hear actually back here in Washington now, groups and people say we should just sequester all that coal in the ground, the gas we keep in the ground, the oil we keep in the ground. They used to not make that argument. Now they're actually making that argument. And the idea behind that is we can't afford to put that carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, so let's stop it. Other groups will say, well, gee, that means we shouldn't build the Keystone Pipeline, and it's unsafe or something like that. Other groups still will say fracking has to stop because it's unsafe and it'll pollute the water and all the rest. And all I can tell you is it's nonsense. We've been hydraulically fracturing wells in the United States for 60 years. We've done it over 1 million times. The real thing that's happened is we've employed horizontal drilling along with it. We used to drill straight down and try to get it. Now we drilled straight down and turn the bit and use technology to pull it out. And that fracking regulation revolution has led to the largest increases in oil and gas production in the U.S. in history, and we're all enjoying the benefit of that.
I think it's definitely something to celebrate. Final thoughts, Dan, elaborate on the actual role of the Department of Energy. What are your thoughts there in closing?
Well, it's interesting. The Department of Energy was created, in essence, to reduce our dependence on foreign oil, and near as I can tell, it had nothing to do with that through most of its history now, which is pushing almost 40 years. What really happened is technology, good old American hard work and blood and sweat and investment, and that made the difference. And I'm not sure we need a Department of Energy, to be perfectly honest with you. I think the private sector does what we don't have a Department of Computers, and I think our technology sector seem to do quite well. I don't know.
That's a great way to put it. That is a great way to put it, especially when you said, 61% increase in oil coming out of private lands and a 6% decrease on federal lands. I think that just the supply and demand and free market capitalism is actually what's making this energy revolution possible.
It always works, but it drives the control freaks in Washington crazy because they can't take credit for it.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been enlightening to hear. Thank you for clarifying the difference between what's available out there and what we can get to and what maybe the government is standing in the way of. But it's been great having you on today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Hey, we'll be right back over the break here. You're listening to Accelerated Wealth with Doug Berkey and Chris Abeyta. You can always reach us at 466-5634. When we come back, we're going to be talking about why taxes are going to be going up over the next 20 to 30 years and what you can do to limit or minimize your taxation as you move into retirement.
Let's go back to Doug Berkey and Chris Abeyta for more about your financial future with Accelerated Wealth.
AM 740 KVOR, you're listening to Accelerated Wealth today, where you get retirement confidence in an uncertain world. I'm Chris Abeyta, your host with co-host Doug Berkey. Today we're talking about taxes, everybody's favorite thing. And, we're in the midst of an increasing tax environment. Here's the statement. Your taxes are going to go up over the next 20 to 30 years whether you're in your 40s, your 50s, maybe you're in your 60s, maybe you're already retired. You can be looking as you look into the time horizon, that more and more of the money that you are making or working for, and more of the money that you have saved for your retirement is going to be taken away from you to pay for what the government is spending. And we're going to tell you why, but we're also going to tell you what you can do to keep more of your money that you've worked so hard for and give less and less to the government in a way that's legal. So you don't want to miss this. But Doug, let's talk about this. Why is it that taxes are going to go up? And I think everybody knows this, but let's just hit some of the bullet points that really drive this home, because it's pretty outrageous of what's happening right now.
Well, it really is, Chris. I mean, one of the things is we've added more debt as a country in the last 5 years than we had in the previous 200 years.
That's amazing. That's staggering.
And everybody says, well, what's the big deal about the debt? We forget that there's interest required on that debt.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that the reason that the Federal Reserve, in my opinion, has kept interest rates so low is if they raise interest rates, then the interest on that enormous debt takes up most of the tax revenue. Just pay the interest.
So we're really in a catch-22 situation. We're really in a tough spot. So the national debt right now is at $18.1, $18.2 trillion. And Doug, you made an interesting comment. We've tacked up more debt in the last 5 or 6 years than we have in 200 years. I mean, we're spending like crazy. So that's the first thing. There's the debt. The next thing is the federal deficit. And a lot of times people don't know the difference between this. So the debt is what we owe. And every taxpayer in America owes about $154,000 to the debt. Okay. The deficit is what we're overspending from what we bring in. So if you make $100,000 and you're spending $150,000 to live, there's a deficit of $50,000 a year. Well, with the federal government, we bring in about $2.5 trillion and we spend about $3.5 trillion. So we're anywhere this year between $800 billion to $1 trillion overspending, even though we're bringing in a ton of money, more money than we have ever taxed the American people in history.
Yeah, pretty incredible, Chris. And what's kind of sad in this environment is that what we've done as a country, in my opinion, is we have privatized profits. When banks, for example, make a profit, that profit goes to their stockholders. But when they fail, we as a country have to bail them out. So we've privatized losses. So we've now nationalized the losses that we have to take on and gets added to our debt. So that system is not working.
Yep. Here's the other thing is there's benefits and there's entitlements. And this is where it impacts you personally. So when we get to this, there's Social Security, which is not an entitlement. It's a benefit. It's something that you and I have been paying into for decades and decades. We're giving that money to the government, and now they're going to give it back to us, and they're going to tax us. But here's the key. As the baby boomers, are reaching 65 and reaching age for Social Security, 10,000 baby boomers a day are starting to take their Social Security check.
Yeah, huge numbers.
It's huge. We've also got Medicare. So we've got more 10,000 a day baby boomers getting on Medicare. We've got Medicaid. We have food stamps, almost 50 million people on food stamps right now. Disability is at an all-time high. We have Obamacare. And what that means is that basically people are taking money away from you to subsidize other people's health insurance.
Here in the state of Colorado, Chris, the average monthly subsidy per person that qualifies for subsidy is $217 a month. Well, multiply that times the number of people in the state of Colorado, and that money has to come from somewhere. They may perceive it as a free benefit, but it comes out of our taxes. So whenever you give a benefit to somebody, you have to take it away from somebody else.
If you're interested in, and we're going to talk about solutions today, but give us a call. If this is bothering you and you just want to sit down and say, how can I minimize my taxation going forward? How can I create lower taxes in retirement? How can I create tax-free income streams? The number's 466-5634. That's 466-5634. We recently are in the process of working with a company. It's owned by a business owner. They're a well-known company here in Colorado Springs. And using our business tax structures, we've been able to save them close to $400,000 in annual taxes just by doing their taxes differently and employing a business strategy. That's $400,000 a year that business owner gets to keep for himself, to expand his business, to hire more people, and to create his own retirement, and that's on an annual basis. Now, you may not be in that situation. You may be a business owner, and you want to find out more about that. Give us a call. The number's 466-5634. But as an individual moving into retirement, we can show you how to actually minimize your taxation so that you can keep more of your money. We're doing workshops this week. We're always doing workshops. We're doing individual appointments as well. You can come and visit with us. Again, the number's 466-5634 at Accelerated Wealth. You can always email us right here at money, right at the station, money@kvor.com. That's money@kvor.com. That one's pretty easy to remember. Doug, just another thing that is proof that taxes are going up in the future is when you look at the federal spending budget, of that $3.5 trillion, 2/3 of that entire budget is already fixed. It's already fixed on entitlements, on benefits that are owed and due, and on interest. There's only 1/3 that the government can actually cut, and that's in the areas of domestic spending and military spending or defense spending. And so the government really has its hand. We are not in a good situation. And so because the federal government is not in a good situation, you have to take action. You have to take personal action to decide if you want to continue to pay more taxes or if you just only want to have to pay what's legal and keep more and more for yourself. And this may be something that you sat down with your CPA. The challenge is most CPAs during this season, they are so busy, they can only look what you've given them and they can look backwards and try and minimize your taxation for this year. We're talking about minimizing your taxes next year, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So, Doug, let's talk about, has anybody ever told you when you retire, you're going to be in a lower tax bracket than you are today?
Well, sure. We've heard that all the time. The reality is that maybe we're making less money in retirement, so maybe that would positively affect us from a taxation standpoint. But that's not the goal. The goal is to be able to maintain lifestyle. But if you think about it, in all likelihood, your home may be paid off, so you no longer have an interest deduction. Your kids are probably grown and out of the house, so you no longer have them as a deduction.
I'm losing all my deductions here.
Yeah, you're losing your deductions. You're no longer employed, so you're not putting money into a 401k or IRA.
So all my income is now taxable if it's coming out of my IRAs or my pensions.
That's right. So the things that created a tax deduction for you while you were employed now in retirement potentially no longer exist for most folks. So the likelihood of being in a lower tax bracket doesn't appear to be very strong.
That is so powerful. Really it's two things. Number one, you're probably going to have less deductions when you retire, which is, if you don't deduct deductions, you're going to pay more income taxes on what's coming in. But number two, who's it to say that you're in a certain tax bracket today while you're taking a deduction on your 401 or your contribution to your IRA or your 401k? Who's to say you're going to be in a lower tax bracket? That means you're making less money. It also means you might be broke. Who wants to be there? But does the government have the ability to simply change the tax brackets when you retire?
Oh, absolutely. And they have. This year we have a new tax bracket of 39.6%. And for a married couple, you hit that tax bracket $100,000 sooner than you hit the 35% tax bracket last year. So they didn't just change a new tax bracket, they lowered the threshold for it. Think about it this way, Chris. Most of our listeners are funding 401ks and IRAs, and we're not saying that those are bad, but think about this analogy. If you bought a car at the car dealership and the dealer said, I don't know what the interest rate's going to be on this loan, Doug, and I have no idea what the monthly payment's going to be, but we figure it out, we'll let you know. And we laugh and say, no way in the world we'd do that. And yet, haven't we done that with our IRAs and 401ks? We've let the government say, put it in now, and when we figure it out, when you get to retirement, we'll let you know what your tax bracket is at that point. We'll let you know what the requirements for minimum distributions are, because those have changed 3 times in my lifetime. And so we would never do that, and yet with the most important piece of our financial future, we let somebody else be in control. And you have a partner in your 401k and your IRA unless you do something about it proactively to position that money so it's not subject to taxation.
And who is that partner?
It's the government.
So when you ask the question, how much is in your 401k, you have to ask the question, how much is yours and how much belongs to the federal government, because you have not paid taxes on that yet. When we come back, we're going to talk about solutions on how to keep more of the money that you've worked hard, that you've been saving for, and how to create some tax-free income streams to diversify your income streams in retirement. One, so you can retire and you can enjoy it and not be paying the government more than they're supposed to get. We'll be right back. You're listening to Accelerated Wealth on AM 740 KVOR, 466-5634. That's 466-5634. 5634 to come to one of our workshops or to sit down and talk about how to minimize your taxes in retirement.
Let's go back to Doug Berkey and Chris Abeyta for more about your financial future with Accelerated Wealth.
You're on AM 740 KVOR. You're listening to Accelerated Wealth. I'm Chris Abeyta with your co-host Doug Berkey. Today we're talking about how to minimize your taxation going forward. I mentioned in the last segment, we saved a business owner. This is an individual that owned a business, $400,000 per year. That's this year, next year, basically indefinitely, just by restructuring some of the business and using some legal things that you can actually do. So if you're a business owner and you're paying more than $150,000 a year in taxes, you've got 11 employees or more, you need to give us a call. Give us a call. The number's 466-5634. We need to do an analysis to see if we can save you, possibly up to 30, maybe even 40% of your current tax liability. Again, that's 466-5634. We have some very high-powered tax professionals that we work with, ERISA professionals, and we can do a free analysis on your business. Now, again, that most of you, that's not you. You're listening right now, and you're just an individual, and you're thinking, what can I do personally? Well, here's what we're going to dive into solutions right now. First off, there are 3 different buckets that you can put your money in. The first bucket is fully taxable. Every time you put money in there, every time there's a gain, you're going to get taxed on it that year right away. Now, the second bucket is what we call tax deferred. So as you put money in there, you don't get taxed annually on the gain. You only get taxed at the end when you begin to pull money out. So this represents your IRAs, your 401ks, thrift savings plans, TSBs. The money inside is going to compound faster because it's not being taxed every year. And your money is doing what we call triple compounding. It's compounding on the principal, compounding on the interest, and then compounding on the taxes you would have paid, but you will pay taxes at the end when you start pulling money out. Now, the third bucket, this is the golden bucket. This is what we call tax-free money. And so here you put money in. Not only does it grow tax-deferred, but when you take it out, it is tax-free. You owe no money, or you owe no taxes on that. So if you can imagine these 3 buckets, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to pour money that's fully taxable either into the tax-deferred bucket or pour it right into the tax-free bucket and move more and more and more of your savings and your funds into the tax-free bucket so that when you start taking an income stream in retirement, that income stream, Doug, is tax-free.
Yeah, pretty powerful, Chris. We've all been taught we should diversify our assets. We think you should diversify your income streams.
We know.
So that not only is a portion of it taxable, but a large portion of it is tax-free. And obviously the goal here is to have you keep as much of your money as you can and not have to give it up to potential taxation. So talk to me, Chris, about what are some of the possible positioning of where we could put our money that could grow tax-free.
Well, what's great is this is completely legal. And so what we're sharing with you, maybe your financial advisor hasn't shared this with you, your CPA, so take notes on this. Number 1, you've heard of Roths. That's one place where you can put money. That is a tax-free bucket. It's going to grow tax-free, and when you take the money out, you're going to be able to create a tax-free stream of income. So that's number 1. Now, Doug, muni bonds have been considered tax-free in some ways, but really not 100%.
Well, they are included in your income for Social Security taxation purposes. And so that limits the benefit of it.
It does. And so muni bonds are in a challenging spot for many of them right now. However, there's something else that we like a lot, and we call this a super Roth. It's really an LIRP, a LIRP, a life insurance retirement plan. Okay, life insurance retirement plan. And the way this works is you put money into it. But the reason it's called a super Roth is because you're not limited to how much you can put in. You're not limited to $5,000 or $6,500 a month. You can structure this in such a way that you can put in $10,000. I'm in a year. You can put in $10,000 a year. You can put in $10,000 a month. It's however you want to structure it. That money is going to grow tax-free. And when you take it out, if it's designed properly by somebody who understands how to create these life insurance retirement plans, it's going to come out tax-free. And that will create a powerful and amazing tax-free income stream. So if you're 40 or older, this is something you have to commit to. You can't just go dump a bunch of money into this. It has to be structured correctly. and you need to work with somebody, an advisor that knows how to do this. If you're interested in that, come join us at one of our workshops or give us a call. The number's 466-5634. That's 466-5634. I want to give a quick example of just somebody that we helped them with their taxes. We had a gentleman, been a client for a couple years now, and he had just left one job, had a significant 401k, had significant stock options that he had that were coming due. And as we were looking at all these things, Doug, what we did is we said, okay, some of this money is already tax deferred and needs to stay in that tax deferred basket, but some of it was completely taxable. And we were actually able to change where that went into a structure that allowed that money to grow tax deferred. And basically by doing that, we were able to save him probably 10, 15, maybe even 20 years worth of annual taxes by just structuring the money correctly.
Yeah, huge difference financially for him, both short-term and long-term. And the bottom line, he gets to keep more of his own money, which is what all of us want.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So real quick, just the highlights on how do these life insurance retirement plans work?
Well, there are a couple major types, but they've been around, Chris, since before the tax code was written. I mean, we deal with one company that's been around writing these for 400 years. So that's really a powerful idea. They pay dividends that if they're properly structured, the dividends are tax-free. Some of them have indexes that you can track, so you can't lose any money. The worst you can do is zero.
So if the market crashes, your principal's protected. But if the market goes up, you can make up to 10, 13, even in some cases 14% of the market gain. So very, very high growth potential, but a floor of zero. So when the market crashes, you lose nothing.
Yeah, and bottom line is it's going to develop wealth tax-free. In many states, Chris, all that money is protected from creditors. So that it provides, whether you're a business owner, an individual who's worried about liability or somebody coming after it, there are specific laws already in place. These are all things that are done with approval of the IRS. They conform with IRS tax code 7702.
Right. So if you're interested in this is something I'm personally doing, you're personally doing. A lot of our clients are doing this. And what you're doing is you're creating a retirement income stream that is going to be tax-free. So if you're 40 or older, this is a great time to get this started. Give us a call. The number's 466-5634. That's 466-5634 to talk about that. And you can always email us right here at money@kvor.com. That's money@kvor.com. And just write in there, life insurance retirement plan or tax-free retirement, and we can set up a time. You can also come to one of our workshops where we talk about how to build the right strategy for your retirement. Doug, we got a few more solutions I want to cover. That is one of them. The next one is really, if taxes are going to be going up in the future, you need to protect what you have because you're going to be able to plan. It's not possible to move all of your money into that tax-free basket, especially if you've got large IRAs or you've got large 401ks. We can talk about Roth conversions in a minute, but you need to get a plan to really think through how can I actively minimize my taxation in retirement.
No doubt. And we also develop strategies around which assets to spend down first, Chris, to also minimize taxes.
You know, that can be hard. Which do I start with my IRA? When do I take my Social Security? But in protecting, one of the things is you want to make sure that you don't go through another 2008. And if you haven't restructured your plan, if you're not doing something differently than you were in 2008 and you lost 30, 40, 50%, number one, you may not have any income to tax. You may effectively get to the tax-free or the 0% tax bracket simply because you don't have any income or you have so little income, and that's not where you want to be. So you need to look at your entire life savings to say, how much of this is protected from the next market downturn and from the next market crash? And that's, again, something that we can look at when we sit down and look at your overall plan. We can help you protect that. There's different financial tools and strategies to be able to do that. But I would say, Doug, that the biggest thing is get a plan. Okay? Let's take a look at what buckets is your money in. Is it in the taxable bucket? Is it in the tax deferred? Is most of it in the tax free? And then we'll build a strategy to begin to migrate money over from tax deferred into tax free. And if nothing else, begin to diversify your income streams in retirement. And here's what will happen. You will begin to get a better idea of what your future looks like. You'll also be able to get a better comfort level, clarity of how much income will I have in the future, how much of that will be taxable, how much of that will be tax-free, and what my lifestyle can look like in the future. If you don't have that and you're getting closer to retirement or you're in retirement and you need that, let's sit down, come to one of our workshops. We're always doing these. Give us a call. We'll find a time that works for you, and we will help you basically create retirement confidence in the midst of an uncertain world. Hey, thanks for joining us today. We're running out of time. I do want to encourage you, join us tomorrow, every Monday on Money Mondays right here with Jim Arthur at 8:10 to 8:17 on AM 740 KVOR. You've been listening to Accelerated Wealth.
The opinions on this radio talk show are those of Mr. Abeyta and Mr. Walton and their guest speakers, not necessarily those of Accelerated Wealth, LLC. The radio talk show may contain forward-looking statements, including but not limited to statements as to future events that involve various risks and uncertainties. Forward-looking statements involve known and unknown risks, uncertainties, and other factors that may cause actual events or results to differ materially than those that were forecast. Therefore, no forecast should be construed as a guarantee. Investing in security and annuities involves a risk of principal loss. Prior to making any investment decision, a listener should consult a professional to determine the risk, benefits, fees associated with a particular investment. Info obtained by a third-party resource is considered reliable, but accuracy cannot be guaranteed.